Deep within a dark, magical realm, our resident Chuni Bu protagonist, Cid Kagenou, struts around in his edgy, pitch-black Shadow Garden gear, while blue magical energy swirls around his boots. Seriously, his main quest in life isn't to be a generic RPG hero or some final boss, but the ultimate puppet master pulling the strings from the background. He stands in his mental happy place, flanking himself with an imaginary elf girl and an army of masked followers.
Smirking under his hood, like a total dork, whose eyes flash red because he desperately wants to be the Eminence in shadow. This whole dream started in his past life as a basic school kid, where he dreamed of posing dramatically in a feathered hat with flower petals. Back in the real world, young Cid spent his nights in a dark bedroom, staring at a glowing computer screen, pretending to be an unremarkable mob character at school, while secretly undergoing a brutal physical grind on the weight bench. He spent his days ignoring high school socialites, reading books, and mastering martial arts, while hiding his power level under a shadowed face. He sat hunched over his desk, preparing for his shadow-broken career, fully aware that no matter how much you bench, you still get deleted by a modern military squad in a gunfight. He even calculated that a direct nuclear strike would vaporize him instantly.
Which is a massive skill issue for a wannabe shadow deity. So what did he do? He wore a victory headband and crammed his brain with crazy theories to avoid getting nuked, desperately scribbling notes and researching bizarre mystical methods. After losing his mind over a knockoff magic book, he decided he had to unlock actual magical energy. He went on a solo budget pilgrimage wearing a goofy straw hat, meditated under freezing waterfalls, did extreme yoga tree poses, prayed on a random wooden cross, and literally smashed his bare head against tree trunks until he bled. Then, one night on a dark road, he saw flickering headlights. Convinced he'd finally found the magical source, he sprinted toward it and got himself completely pancaked by a massive oncoming delivery truck. Fast forward to his isekai reincarnation as Cid Kagenou, where he retains all those ridiculous memories. Now, out on the training grounds of his family's grand estate, his overbearing, powerhouse older sister Claire is absolutely bodying him in a wooden sword duel. To maintain his masterclass mob character disguise, Cid deliberately lets her break his defenses and take him down with a magically enhanced kick. He flops onto the grass, fake crying about how she's way too strong, while Claire looks down at him like he's a pathetic disappointment who brings shame to their prestigious spell sword lineage. She's only 12, but already has the stuck-up aura of a top-tier warrior, sighing in disgust as she lectures him about their noble blood and demands he take it seriously. Cid plays the weak, submissive little brother perfectly, so Claire summons a flashy magic orb
and holds her wooden sword horizontally to continue her condescending lecture about his lack of magic, technique, and physique. She predicts he'll always be a bottom-tier apprentice, but then decides to flex by charging her blade with glowing energy. With one clean horizontal slice, she explodes a massive boulder and strikes a proud pose amidst the rubble. Cid does his best NPC impression, cheering with fake starry-eyed wonder and asking for her secret. Claire smugly sheathes her sword, says it's impossible for him anyway, and tells him to clean up the shattered rocks while she heads inside. The second she's out of sight, Cid's goofy loser act vanishes instantly. A devious grin spreads across his face, because at just 10 years old, he's actually a max-level magic prodigy. He praises his own flawless acting and starts effortlessly juggling the heavy, broken boulders in a high-speed loop. He balances the heavy stones perfectly on his fingertips and knows he can execute crazy physical feats. He resolves to keep his true fangs hidden like a proper shadow broker. He plays hacky-sack with the rocks, but realizes he still hasn't figured out how to survive a nuke. Since nukes don't exist in this fantasy world, he could
technically ignore it, but our perfectionist protagonist refuses to compromise his edgy standards. Eager for a live fire test, he sprints toward the nearby dark forest under the twilight sky, hoping to hunt down some local bandits to test his gear as night completely consumes the woods.
Over at a chaotic bandit camp hidden deep in the dark woods, a rowdy gang of bandits is throwing a victory party inside a run-down wooden building. The stubble-faced leader and his light-haired lackey are chugging alcohol and celebrating their successful raid, while a bald thug laughs about how easily they slaughtered a helpless merchant woman and her young boy earlier.
In their sick, twisted memories, we see the tragic victims slumped over a bloody cart, while these scumbags mock them. Back in the present, the bald bandit chuckles at how careless merchants are, and the leader smugly begins to recount how he threatened them. He laughs and mutters about making them show their valuables.
Suddenly, Cid crashes through the roof like a complete maniac, scaring the absolute crap out of the dark-haired thug and sending the leader reeling. Brandishing his weapon, Cid lunges into the camp, screaming a wild battle cry, leaving the bald bandit sweating in terror and the leader yelling about who this weird kid is. Our boy Cid strikes an edgy combat stance, screams a classic thug line about handing over their valuables, and gets labeled with a hilarious protagonist text box. He demands their gold, pointing his dark slime weapon
At the bald thief and ordering him to jump. The terrified bandit complies, and when Cid hears a satisfying coin-clinking sound, he happily claims the loot. The spiky-haired bandit is utterly baffled by this weirdo, but Cid just tells them to stay calm, while claiming he's just a passing, unremarkable midget. He then launches into a full-blown commercial pitch for his custom-made slime suit and slime sword,
explaining that slimes can change shape with magic, to the utter horror of the surrounding thugs. In a funny flashback, we see Cid blending caught slimes into jelly to craft an ultra-high conductivity suit and sword, complete with stylized, strong and cheap infomercial slogans. He boasts about their 99% magic conductivity and lunges forward, slashing the bald bandit's chest while offering the gear to the lady of the house. He unleashes a barrage of high-speed aura slashes, instantly slicing open the light-haired bandit and cutting down the reddish-brown thug with a brutal cross-slash. Cid laughs like a literal psychopath with jagged teeth, earning another protagonist label as he turns the entire camp into a bloody blender. Standing in the quiet, blood-soaked camp, he casually shrugs off the massacre. The battered bandit leader glares in pure hatred, and Cid realizes he only has one target left to test his nifty function number 2 on. The desperate leader screams about being a royal capital Bushin master and unleashes a heavy downward slash. The blade hits Cid's chest with a metallic clang, doing 0 damage and leaving the leader in shock. Cid smugly points to his intact slime suit, explaining that it has incredible defensive armor stats. The frustrated leader swings again, but Cid effortlessly dodges while critiquing the Bushin sword style. He flips through the air with extreme agility, leaving the leader completely unable to track his speed. When the leader asks where his sword went, Cid delivers a brutal mid-air kick that sends the boss flying. He reveals that nifty function number 2 lets him draw his slime sword from anywhere, adding a final burn by noting the leader was actually stronger than his sister. Cid stands victoriously among the wreckage, loots a heavy pouch of stolen coins, and dramatically tells the dead merchants that their stolen goods will now fund his rise as the Eminence in shadow. However, his attention is caught by a weird, cloth-covered cage. He pulls back the cover, expecting a slave, only to find a rotting, pale, corpse-like figure that lets out an eerie whistle. Realizing it's still barely breathing, Cid recognizes the symptoms of possession. He recalls how the church claims to purify these cursed people, but actually massacres them behind closed doors to keep the public happy. Suddenly, a massive, unstable magic wave crackles around the rotting body,
Recognizing the immense magical potential, Cid gets a devious grin on his face and decides to steal this test subject for some wild magical experiments. Back at his secret forest base, after several days of intense magic tweaking, Cid stands in his academy uniform holding a cleaver and a hammer, admitting he was completely shocked by the results of his experiments. It turns out the gross, rotting blob of flesh was actually a gorgeous, top-tier blonde elf girl. Cured and radiant, Alpha stares at her healed skin in absolute disbelief, immediately kneeling before Cid with tears of intense gratitude and offering to devote her entire life to him. Cid casually dismisses the heavy proposal, but internally, his Chunibyo brain starts spinning. He sits on a crate and asks if she wants to be his follower in Shadow Garden, which predictably confuses her. Realizing she has absolutely no idea what he's talking about, he knows he needs to set a concrete goal. After quickly brainstorming a wild fantasy trope to manipulate her, he declares her name is now Alpha and makes up a massive lie on the spot. He gravely announces that their grand mission is to stop the resurrection of the demon Diablos. Alpha, sweating in confusion, asks if he means the demon from the fairy tales. Cid confirms this with a straight face, launching into a fabricated history lesson about how 3 ancient heroes defeated Diablos. He claims the cult covered up the truth and that Diablos cursed the heroes' descendants. He describes how this curse is passed down, calling it the Curse of Diablos, which explains her possession illness. Scratching silly drawings in the dirt with a branch, he explains that her rotting skin was actually proof of her heroic lineage. Alpha clutches her head in anger, furious that hero descendants are persecuted instead of revered. Cid points his stick at the drawings, explaining that a secret shadow organization called the Diablos cult rewrote history to wipe them out. He adds that they are actively trying to revive the demon and designates them as their ultimate enemies. He claims this deadly cult operates entirely in the dark and erases anyone in their way. Since he employs the same sneaky tactics, he plans to stand up to them from the dark while striking a highly dramatic pose. Posing dramatically under a massive full moon as snow begins to fall, Cid declares their edgy motto, "We lurk in the shadows, and we hunt the shadows." He warns her that saving the world won't be easy, and that failure means absolute destruction, before offering his hand to recruit her. Completely brainwashed by his epic storytelling, Alpha is filled with righteous, vengeful fury. She realizes the massive scale of their enemy and vows that the suffering of others must stop. She stands and yells in defiance. Kneeling under the giant moon, she solemnly pledges her life to Shadow Garden to bring death to their enemies. She bows her head, wishing vengeful death upon the sinners. The intense atmosphere instantly evaporates as Alpha bashfully clutches her collar while Cid stares at her with a blank, deadpan expression. Internally, our boy is absolutely celebrating because he totally nailed the role play. He maintains his deadpan face while realizing she's fully invested, smirking at how easily she bought his improvised act. As they walk through the snowy woods, Cid happily plans to keep this hilarious roleplay going forever, reminding himself that the cult doesn't actually exist, but his eyes glow anyway as he commits to the bit, already excited to use more cheesy lines about the demon's revival before a final note teases the next installment of his ridiculous journey.
The video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Like the video if you're ready for the next part. We open under the clear skies of the Kagenou estate grounds, where Cid quietly reflects with Alpha on their lengthy 3-year journey since the glorious founding of Shadow Garden. Now that he and Alpha are 13 and his aggressively overprotective sister, Claire, has turned 15, she is legally obligated to attend the capital's magic school. But before she can leave, she corners him in her new uniform, threatening violence if he doesn't say she looks good. Cid's sister would have left,
But her plans are completely derailed on the day of her departure, because as the dramatic narrator and our panicked protagonist shout in unison, his sister was suddenly kidnapped in the second episode of this ridiculous journey. Talk about a generic fantasy hook. In her empty room, the bald patriarch of the family strokes his goatee, praising the kidnapper's stealth, and claiming the culprit must have been exceptionally skilled. The mama tilts her head with a sweet, angelic smile, asking if they were truly powerless. But when the pops tries to dodge the blame by claiming he can't be held responsible for sleeping through it, she morphs into fanged absolute rage and punches him. She launches him across the room, screaming that he shouldn't make convoluted excuses and despairing over their family's only hope, leaving him weakly whimpering on the floor. Watching his parents fight, Cid nervously wonders if his hairline is doomed. He shrugs it off, walking down the quiet hallway, musing on how magic lets women be exceptionally strong
and frequently makes them heirs. Content with his lack of presence, he slips through the lavish parlor, completely content with his unremarkable status. Then he enters his bedroom to lock his door, exhaling deeply as he lets his background character mask slide. Sensing a stealth build by his window, he calls out to his subordinate, prompting Beta to step out from the white drapes, clutching a bundle of gathered documents. Cid questions where Alpha is, and Beta reports that she is looking for Claire's tracks, before adopting a grave tone to announce that the culprit is a high-ranking officer of the Diablos cult, specifically one of their highest-ranking commanders. Fully committing to the bit, Cid asks why they took his sister, and Beta explains that they suspect she might be a hero's descendant, pointing toward the northern region on her maps. Cid poses dramatically, mentally noting that Beta is their third member, and that Alpha keeps picking girls up like stray cats. Suddenly, Alpha appears to proudly praise their sleek new slime suits. Cid is highly entertained by how they play along with his shadow routine, endlessly elaborating on his fabricated cult backstory. When Beta starts translating ancient letters pointing to the cult, Cid decides to act cool despite knowing it doesn't exist, and hurls a folding knife directly into the desk map. He sits back and declares that his knife throw reveals where they are keeping Claire, explaining that the northern base is a fake and the real one is south. Beta blinks in surprise at the lack of markings, but suddenly gasps, her brain performing Olympic-level mental gymnastics to process the coordinates and conclude that there must be an underground hideout in the south. She looks up with tears of pure devotion, stammering in absolute awe of his instant analytical skills and how he understood their hidden meaning while looking at him with worship. Striking a sharp pose, Cid corrects her that she must refer to him as Shadow, pointing toward the horizon as he orders a midnight rescue. Beta bows in unison, leaving our protagonist internally laughing at how they follow up his random, fabricated lies with an Oscar-worthy performance. Cut to the gloomy, damp underground prison of the southern region, where the steady echo of water droplets sets a classic dungeon crawler mood. Clicking his boots, the tall, blonde cult officer Rex approaches the iron bars, mocking his captain, Cid Kagenou, by asking how she is holding up. Kneeling in heavy chains, our feral sister instantly recognizes his punchable face as the prestigious but trash-tier Viscount Olba, who got utterly clapped in the first round of Princess Iris's tournament. She laughs in his face, ruthlessly roasting his pathetic tourney defeat and calling him the ultimate first-round loser. Rex instantly throws a lethal kick at her skull, but she ducks it like a pro, letting the force crater the stone wall behind her. Surprised by her high reflex stat, Rex admits she's got genuine mechanics instead of just throwing magic around wildly. Remaining completely unfazed by the rubble, Claire smugly boasts that her bratty brother taught her how to optimize magic when Rex questions who her sibling is, and she proudly claims her bratty brother. We get a quick training flashback of her aggressively styling on young Cid while secretly stealing his masterclass techniques. Though Cid always ended up eating grass, which is exactly why she bullies him every single day in the present.
Back in the dark cell, she demands to go home, but Rex pivots to asking if she's felt unwell or suffered possession debuffs, like rotting black spots. She scoffs at his fake doctor act, recalling how Cid cured her with weird stretching exercises a year ago and left her feeling perfectly fine. Rex realizes she's had the symptoms and is definitely compatible. And when Claire demands answers, he refuses and threatens to investigate her brother. Big mistake. Delivering a sudden, violent strike that connects directly with Rex's face, Claire breaks free from her shackles and unleashes an insane, blood-soaked anime rage aura, whispering that she will end him. Rex is horrified by her self-mutilation build, but Claire just steps forward, howling that she will slaughter his entire lineage if he touches Cid. Desperate to mute her, Rex delivers a heavy blow to her face, knocking her out. He decides to leave to harvest her blood instead. Suddenly, an armored knight shrieks that invaders are tearing up the dungeon and warns of attackers in the hall. Rex rushes out, sword drawn, only to freeze in sheer terror at the sight of his entire elite guard squad lying dead, shouting in disbelief. A massive wave of magic violently explodes the ceiling. Sweating and unable to track her speed, Rex watches Alpha step out, flanked by several masked members of Shadow Garden. They declare doom upon the Diablos cult. With Alpha standing tall as her silver hair frames her mask and gliding past him to whisper about the demon Diablos and the truth behind possession, Rex loses his absolute mind, screaming to know where they learned their top-tier endgame guild secrets. Alpha simply turns her back as Rex desperately rants about their leak, which shouldn't have been possible, but she immediately cuts him down with a lightning-fast slash that brings him to his knees. Smiling beneath her mask, Alpha claims they won't kill him as her nearby subordinate giggles because they need info. Cornered, Rex swallows a shady rage-enhancing pill, while Alpha watches calmly, triggering a grotesque awakening transformation that shatters the floor. While the Shadow Garden babes stand perfectly unbothered, Beta flags his escape through the wall and urges to chase, but Alpha smugly stops her, as Beta turns back in surprise, claiming that their god-tier boss, Shadow, already predicted this escape path and is waiting up ahead because Cid foresaw how this would go, which leaves Beta beyond words. Meanwhile, deep within the vaulted corridors of the massive Southern Underground facility, our Chunibyo King Cid is posing in full Shadow cosplay, completely oblivious to the fact that he got lost and separated from his team. With his cloak billowing dramatically, he mentally notes that this bandit hideout has way too high of a production budget. Suddenly, Rex stumbles in, wheezing and totally shocked, which Cid immediately frames as a mandatory boss-level event. Rex gets into a defensive stance and swings his blade in a frantic lunge, but Shadow casually blocks his ultimate physical strike with a single index finger. While Rex is drowning in sheer horror, Cid's analytical inner monologue notes that this bandit actually has a massive mana pool, even higher than Alpha, but possesses an absolutely zero-tier swordsmanship build. To Cid, relying strictly on brute force magic is incredibly crude and, frankly, quite boring.
In his past life, he learned the hard way that spamming raw damage without spacing leads to a quick game over, which fully justified his current highly optimized survival strategy. Deciding to flex his physical gaming expertise, Shadow reaches for his waist, declaring he must step in to show him how real combat works, as he audibly sheathes his weapon. Rex is utterly baffled, screaming not to be made light of and calling him a brat as he charges. With perfect spacing, Shadow zips past his attack, delivering a non-magical punch to his solar plexus that launches the massive cult officer backward. Cid lectures him about using an opponent's momentum without magic, then zips back to deliver a devastating kick
that leaves Rex completely winded. Shadow evades another desperate lunge with mesmerizing grace. Facing an absolute wall of skill, Rex has a classic villain flashback to his childhood training, remembering how utterly helpless he felt against his former master, realizing this boy's power gap is just as vast. Trembling and gasping in agony, Rex begs to know where he came from as he frantically asks about his opponent's origins and what Shadow Garden actually is. Shadow delivers the ultimate Chunibyo line. We lurk in the shadows, and we hunt the shadows, stating that is their sole purpose. Rex desperately snarls that opposing them is hopeless and that they stand no chance, since the darkness runs far deeper than they know. Shadow countersmirks, claiming they will simply burrow ever deeper. Insulted, Rex screams that this isn't a game and calls him a little shit, greedily popping a handful of illegal magic pills and clutching his chest as they react, to amass immense magical power to show off his ultimate strength and complete his awakening giant form. The massive giant slams his blade, breaking the tiles, prompting Shadow to leap backward. Rex swings wide, laughing maniacally and roaring that it is useless, and screaming in triumph, boasting about his raw strength and power. He shrieks that Shadow is slow, flimsy, and brittle, as Shadow effortlessly dodges, calmly preparing his final attack, declaring that playtime is over. Shadow unleashes a massive, ink-like wave of black slime magic that completely engulfs Rex. Rex is overwhelmed by the sheer chasm of magic as the impact launches him backward, his mind drifting into a peaceful white void where he remembers his past defeats and realizes this kid is on a whole different level, whispering a quiet goodbye to Melia. Later, our boy Cid sits comfortably at his breakfast table in the morning sun as he reflects on his status, reflecting on how their bandit hunting rescue operation ended. His sister Claire's hands healed instantly, allowing her to head to the capital, though she annoyed him by poking his cheek beforehand. Cid mentally praises the bandit boss for playing his role so well, secretly thrilled he got to use his burrow ever deeper line. He notes that Alpha and the rest keep adding absurd, world-scale lore about a global conspiracy where they capture compatible targets to their imaginary cult, but he completely ignores their elaborate backstory. When they announced they were leaving to travel the world, he assumed they were just letting him down easy and retiring from the game. He feels a bit sentimental sitting on his roof, watching the sunset cast long shadows, knowing he's just a wannabe acting tough, but looking forward to joining the Capital School in 2 years to attend classes at the Capital. And with the narrator teasing that his road is long, Cid raises his fist to the setting sun, swearing to grow strong and keep working to become the true Eminence in Shadow under the setting sun. We kick things off in a dimly lit, abstract mental space where our Chunibyo-in-Chief is busy role-playing on an imaginary throne as he lays down his absolute golden rule. An elite shadow mastermind must always pass as a flawless, bottom-tier background NPC. In his mental visual, a massive venomous serpent rears its head, representing the ultimate truth that the legendary Shadow Eminence and a generic mob character are literally two sides of the same coin. He compares high-tier powerhouses to a basic frog sitting uselessly on a rock, reminding us that even in his past life, he wore a standard gym jersey and meticulously optimized his physical movement just to master the art of being totally unnoticeable. Cut to the massive gates of the Midgar Royal Spellsword Academy, where Cid arrives resolved to continue his flawless run as a complete ghost. Inside the high-windowed classroom, he flaunts his academic report card, celebrating a solid 2 months of maintaining perfectly subpar average grades to completely blend in with the local crowd. But of course, his peaceful grind is instantly griefed when his C-tier NPC buddy, a smug barony son named Hyoro, calls out to him and asks how he did on the practical. while his round-faced sidekick Jaga boasts about their B ranks. Cid calmly shows off his garbage C rank, claiming low mana,
only for Hyoro to lean in with a sneaky grin to remind him of their pre-test wager, specifically the rule that the lowest scoring loser has to face a devastating penalty. Meanwhile, out in the corridor, a random rich boy with imaginary roses gets brutally rejected by the Academy's top-tier idol, Princess Alexia Midgar, who looks like she would rather watch paint dry. The local spectating students watch from behind a doorway, gossiping about her dumping a high-status duke's son in record time, prompting Hyoro to explain that she's the school's untouchable royalty.
Jaga notes her future is probably just a cold political marriage anyway, but Hyoro smugly insists she'd fold if you're stubborn enough, which is when Cid finally chimes in with an annoyed expression and begs to skip this cringe penalty game. Hyoro violently denies the request,
yelling that losing the bet means Cid has to confess to a girl. Cid puts on an award-worthy performance of pure, trembling embarrassment, while Hyoro cackles in his face, openly admitting he just wants to watch a pathetic chump get socially obliterated. Cid sighs at his friend's trash behavior,
as Jaga happily calculates a 100% fail rate, and Hyoro shoves him toward his doom.
Cid dramatically shakes his fists,
but the second they look away, his face twists into a manic, unhinged grin, because this is literally his dream scenario. Getting publicly rejected by the school's idol is the ultimate, gold standard mob achievement. A brief flashback reveals him pulling an all-nighter in his dark dorm, wearing a victory headband to research the perfect confession strategies to maximize his mob rating before launching his mobbist mobfession. He runs at Princess Alexia, slurring her name, while carefully executing his stuttering vibrato.
A precise 60-degree hunch, trembling knees, and a wandering gaze, stopping at a mathematically perfect distance of 182 centimeters, he drops into a rigid, flawless 90-degree bow to pop the question, mentally high-fiving himself for delivering a performance of pure artistic mediocrity and self-described art. Alexia stands frozen in absolute silence. But instead of the expected soul-crushing rejection, she grabs his hands with an ethereal, angelic smile and happily accepts the proposal. Cid's brain completely blue screens, and as he stutters in absolute horror while she casually confirms the relationship, a silent, gargantuan scream of existential dread echoes through the school, because his perfect mob build just got hijacked by a forced rom-com protagonist route. We cut to the bustling academy cafeteria, where Cid sits over his meal staring with a severe frown of pure confusion at his plate. Jaga sits next to him, and Hyoro scowls, agreeing that this entire situation is incredibly suspicious. Cid rants to them about the math not adding up. How does a girl reject a high-tier duke's son, but instantly accept a certified nobody? Hyoro lazily tells him to just shut up and enjoy the win, before screwing up his face to mockingly insist that the princess is probably just using a plain loser as a joke to cleanse her palate from handsome guys like him. Cid stares back with absolute deadpan energy, while the surrounding NPC classmates huddle nearby, whispering absolute murder and throwing lethal daggers with their eyes. This immediate aggro sends a jolt of panic through Cid's nervous system as he realizes standing out like this will completely ruin his hidden mastermind playthrough. Dripping cold sweat, he tries to salvage his cover by casually claiming he's going to dump her immediately because she's way out of his league. The boys gasp in shock, and Cid double downs on his escape plan while picking up some food and swearing them to absolute secrecy about the penalty game. Hyoro and Jaga happily agree, only for a sweet, terrifying voice to chime in right behind them. The boys jump out of their skin as Princess Alexia and her dark-haired maid appear, with the princess casually asking to join their table.
Hyoro immediately panics and rolls out the red carpet with stuttering obsequiousness, while Cid remains completely detached, casually snatching a piece of fish from the serving tray while Jaga watches in awe. The maid serves their luxury plates, and Cid's eyes flare with a devious, galaxy-brain strategy to force a breakup through terrible table manners. He loudly comments on how massive her course is, and when she complains she can never finish it, Cid launches his social suicide attack by shamelessly stealing a huge chunk of fish right off her plate, to Jaga's absolute admiration. He waves a drumstick around, stuffs his face like a starved raccoon, and aggressively crumbles his food, gloating internally that no princess would ever tolerate such a repulsive, uncouth gremlin. For a brief second, Alexia smirks with quiet amusement, but then she hits him with an angelic, loving smile and tells him to eat his fill, even pushing a plate of bread his way. Cid freezes with bread dangling out of his mouth in sheer defeat, while Jaga frantically apologizes for his lack of manners, and Hyoro desperately sucks up to her. Cid can only stare at his traitorous friends, secretly admiring how effortlessly they exude pure background character energy. The princess then drops a bomb. She mentions they both signed up for the Royal Bushin-style practical elective this afternoon and invites him to train, casually adding that she pulled strings to get him into the expert class by royal decree. While his friends stand in absolute dumbfounded shock, we transition to the massive training hall, where high-tier students are running combat drills in their sleek black gear. Various squads are clashing with wooden swords, and Cid observes the high-quality facilities, noting how the school segregates the elite black uniform students from the white uniform beginners. The handsome instructor, Zenon, claps to gather the class and happily introduces Cid as their new transfer student. A random female student immediately objects to a white-clad scrub joining the lobby, but Zenon smoothly pacifies her by revealing it's a direct recommendation from the princess, causing the girl to instantly blush and back down. Cid sweat drops at the sheer power of Alexia's brand, just as the princess herself approaches in her sleek training gear and twin tails. She assumes a combat stance, but Cid immediately tries to throw the match and lazily raises his wooden sword. Alexia challenges him to a bout, and their wooden swords clash with a loud ring. Cid easily parries her attacks, silently analyzing her rock-solid fundamentals and comparing her hard-working style to her overpowered genius sister, Iris. Alexia praises his swordsmanship and admits it is not bad, but her frustration suddenly boils over as she unleashes a heavy strike, shouting that she doesn't like his style. She ends up slightly off balance and quickly apologizes for using too much power, but Cid lazily shrugs it off. Suddenly, Zenon interrupts to scold Alexia, and she quickly turns around as the instructor hands Cid a fresh practice sword. Cid takes it with a basic nod, and Zenon praises his impressive freshman moves before launching into a lecture about how the Royal Bushin style revolutionized the meta and why it's accepted by the younger generation. Cid plays the humble fanboy, complimenting Zenon's fame, which prompts the instructor to laugh and emit literal, sparkling husband material energy. Annoyed by this smooth display, Alexia aggressively steps between them, and as she grips her sword document, she suddenly yanks Cid into a crushing, highly suggestive embrace. This leaves Cid standing absolutely rigid, his soul escaping his body in a frozen, deadpan face of absolute existential despair. The awkwardness continues out in the Grand Academy hallway, where Zenon watches them retreat and warns Alexia that she can't keep running away forever. The princess cold shoulders him, claiming she's just a child who doesn't understand adult politics, and immediately grabs Cid's arm to drag him away as their footsteps echo. Zenon's dark silhouette stands motionless, watching their exit, while Cid glances over with an incredibly bored expression. Looking out at the majestic stone courtyard, Cid finally pieces the puzzle together and confronts her. He points out that Zenon is clearly her fiancé candidate, and that Cid is just being used as a human shield. Alexia casually shrugs it off. but Cid dramatically clutches his chest, whining about how she toyed with his delicate heart just to pick a harmless target. She gives him a flat, deadpan look as she walks on, explaining that Zenon has been forcing the marriage issue lately. Cid waves his hand dismissively and tells her to keep him out of her personal drama. But Alexia suddenly corners him with a smug smirk and addresses him as Mr. Penalty Game Loser. Cid's heart skips a beat as his brain tries to reboot, attempting to play dumb and sweating profusely. She reveals that his round-faced buddy Yaga, or Pot as she calls him, instantly spilled all the beans the second she said hello, prompting Cid's soul to burn with pure rage. Cid vows to turn his traitorous friend into actual mashed potatoes. Alexia deadpans that he's mixing his inner thoughts with his spoken lines before instantly flipping the switch to fake tears and threatening him with execution for making a princess cry. Realizing this girl is a master-tier manipulative actress, Cid accepts defeat, but reminds her that a mere baron's son won't keep a high-tier fiancé away. She asks what he dislikes about Zenon, and Cid points out the instructor's suspiciously perfect, glittering smile.
Standing tall, Alexia tosses a handful of silver coins into the air, declaring that perfect people don't exist, and that she actually prefers predictable scum like Cid. She mockingly steps near the glittering loot, telling him to pick it up. Cid attempts to hold on to his dignity, asking if she thinks he can be bought. But the second she says you do, he drops straight to his knees to eagerly scoop up the cash. Alexia smirks down at her newly acquired subordinate, telling him he's a good boy, but has to yell to get his attention when he ignores her for the money. She points a pen at his collar, firmly declaring that they are keeping up the fake couple act until Zenon gives up. She smirks down, calling him her pooch, while Cid mutters that he won't tolerate such humiliation, only for her to instantly toss another silver coin. Cid moves in a blinding flash of pure greed to fetch the coin, completely accepting his new, highly paid reality as the twisted princess's personal dog. We kick things off in the Grand Training Hall, where Cid has spent 2 agonizing weeks playing the part of a fake boyfriend. Sure, her polite public act makes him want to vomit, but when they're alone, she reveals her actual, delightfully twisted self. Instead of falling for her cute, blushing smile, our boy Cid maintains a flawless, stone-cold, unimpressed gaze, fully immune to her charms because he spent his past life failing to beat high-difficulty RPGs after falling for deceptive boss waifus, making his current strategy to keep his feelings at a solid 0. She immediately points out the terrible dog sketch on his robe, laughing and calling him her personal pooch, before demanding he fetch her some water. Cid tries to act tough and refuses to be her servant, but the split-second sound of a silver coin hits his ears, and his body autopaths at supersonic speeds to deliver a freshly poured glass. She praises her highly convenient, money-driven dog, leaving Cid to curse his own god-tier Pavlovian cash reflexes. During their wooden sword spar, the princess starts venting about how Instructor Zenon acts like a well-adjusted adult. She complains that he doesn't even bother trying to sabotage her, which deeply pisses her off because his effortless skill makes her feel utterly inadequate. Cid, playing the ultimate background character, casually shrugs off his prowess and easily parries her attack, while asking if they aren't basically on the same level anyway. Alexia admits she's worked hard and is relatively strong, but her mood immediately plummets as she compares herself to her cheat code sister, whispering that she has 0 talent and that everyone calls her swordplay mediocre. She flashes back to a soul-crushing memory where she felt microscopic standing in her sister's shadow, especially when her golden child sister patronizingly claimed she liked her sword style. That single compliment made her despise her own style forever. But then, Cid gets surprisingly real, telling her he only hates her style because it's just as gloriously basic as his own, throwing in a casual grunt. He breaks the fourth wall of NPC behavior by admitting he's an awful person who wouldn't care if 1 million people died, and that if she got kidnapped, he'd literally just laugh.
But he argues everyone has their own weird, highly optimized priorities in life, even if others think they're completely trivial. So if their swordplay is truly identical, then he genuinely likes her style. Alexia flushes hard, suspicious of his sudden main character energy. But Cid immediately downgrades back to lazy NPC mode, saying he just hates when things he likes get trashed. This completely shatters her defense, and she abruptly calls off the session to walk home alone. Cut to the school cafeteria, where the Academy's premier NPC trio is finally reunited. Cid's bald classmate is hyped to finally eat together again, while his wavy-haired friend is seething with raw, maidenless jealousy over Cid's daily princess dates. Cid just glares at them, calling them straight-up traitors. The bald kid frantically rubs his dome, arguing he already shaved his head as an apology, though Cid bluntly points out he was always bald. The blonde classmate immediately asks how far they've gotten physically, but Cid shuts it down with a tired shrug. Suddenly, a shadow falls over their table as the handsome, final boss-looking instructor Xenon looms over them, prompting Cid to snap back into his polite student routine. Xenon gravely asks to speak with him in private, telling him to stay calm. Cid acts confused as Xenon drops a massive lore bomb. Alexia didn't make it home yesterday. The blonde classmate lets out a hilarious, high-pitched scream, while Xenon explains they found her shoe and signs of a struggle, meaning she's been kidnapped. Externally, Cid is sweating bullets in classic horror, but internally, his dark, petty brain is cheering. That is, until Xenon adds that Cid is their only suspect, summoning a squad of heavily armored royal guards. Before he can even process the setup, a light-haired knight aggressively grabs him, dragging him off to the interrogation room. Meanwhile, over at the imposing Knights Order headquarters, we find two figures looking out of the massive glass windows as Princess Iris Midgar regally notes she has a firm grasp on the situation. She narrows her eyes, declaring that Cid looks incredibly suspicious, and asks Marquis Xenon for his take. Xenon, acting perfectly composed, agrees that most people suspect the kid, but dismisses Cid's abilities, calling them the absolute embodiment of mediocrity. He pictures the poor mob kid getting harmlessly bullied in an interrogation cell, concluding he simply lacks the stats to pull off a royal kidnapping. Iris wonders if Cid had accomplices, but Xenon dismisses this, predicting the boy won't talk under pressure anyway. Right on cue, the heavy doors slam open as Cid's terrifyingly overprotective older sister, Claire, bursts into the room. She completely cuts off Iris's train of thought about keeping tabs on him, desperately begging the princess to release her brother. Stunned by this sudden breach of security, Iris gives a cold, authoritative glare, demanding to know who this girl is. Xenon immediately panics, scolding Claire for her utter lack of manners in front of royalty. Claire ignores him entirely, fiercely declaring her name and her absolute devotion to her little brother. Xenon quickly backtracks to explain she's actually an elite trial member of the Order, prompting Iris to generously let the girl speak. Claire wastes no time, passionately arguing that her brother is innocent and has been brutally tortured for 5 days straight. Iris tries to save face by telling her not to use the word torture, coolly explaining that they are just conducting a routine, highly thorough investigation. Claire's anxiety spikes as she points out that Cid faces execution if the true culprit isn't found. She has a total anime brain moment, picturing Cid as a delicate, sparkling cinnamon roll who wouldn't hurt a fly, before escalating to full-blown treason by threatening to murder the princess if her precious brother dies. Xenon physically grabs her shoulder to shut her up before they get them both executed. Watching this desperate display, Iris is deeply moved by the sisters' raw, family-first energy, shedding a single dramatic tear as she whispers a silent prayer for Alexia's safety. After his release, Cid retreats to his secret hideout, where Alpha arrives with a fresh paper bag, noting how dire things have gotten. Cid,
sporting some nasty cuts and bandages, immediately rants about how those corrupt knights absolutely obliterated his health bar despite his polite cooperation. Alpha asks why he didn't just break aggro and escape, to which Cid explains he wanted to avoid drawing even more attention, remembering how his past gaming failures in survival simulators always stemmed from drawing early game aggro. She assumes he must have some brilliant galaxy brain reason for keeping his cover intact, though Cid internally deadpans that he absolutely doesn't. Sensing the tragic burden he must be carrying, Alpha insists he replenish his stamina and offers him a plate of thick-cut tuna sandwiches. Cid eagerly scarfs them down,
while Alpha reports that she's been doing some digging of her own and warns him that the corrupt Knights Order is planning to frame him. She explains that high-ranking knights are actually under the influence of the Diabolus cult, and Cid just rolls with it, treating her intense conspiracy as a fun, low-level game mechanic. She continues, theorizing that they want the princess's royal blood to resurrect Diabolus, which leads Cid to logically deduce that Alexia must still be alive. Alpha gasps in pure admiration of his instant analysis before heading out to coordinate their forces, noting that Delta is also nearby. Cid instantly pictures their feral, suicide-charging beastkin DPS, and though Alpha smiles and confirms Delta is dying to see him, he can only murmur her name in mild horror. But as he finishes the food, he realizes he has a major crisis on his hands. When Alpha gives him a stern look, pointing out he just ate her portion of the sandwiches too. Still, she confidently outlines tomorrow's raid, and playfully demands a high-end dinner once this whole quest is cleared. Once she leaves, Cid steps onto his balcony to admire her top-tier ad-libbing skills, before heading back inside and unlatching his heavy loot trunk. He admires his collection of high-end wine, expensive glassware, and fancy cigars, then gazes at his masterfully displayed stolen painting, soaking in the sweet tranquility of his aesthetic. He fondly recalls his late-night bandit hunting grinds, and how he practically begged for every single dropped coin like a true loot goblin, realizing all that exhausting fundraising was purely to set up this ultimate high-class main character flex. At dawn the next day, Beta rushes in with full energy to report that preparations are complete, only to stop and look around the empty, quiet room in confusion. She finds Cid sitting majestically in his high-backed chair, swirling a glass of wine in the dim light like an absolute final boss. Beta is instantly paralyzed with pure awe, gazing at his 90,000 zenny vintage wine, his luxury jewel-adorned lamp, and his priceless, legendary masterpiece painting. She is overwhelmed with deep sympathy, imagining the tragic, world-saving burden he must carry, even though Cid's thoughts confirm he carries absolutely zero burden. Refocusing on the mission, Beta drops to her knees to brief him on their citywide raid on the cult's hideouts, explaining that Delta's chaotic ambush will serve as their signal. She then shows him a mysterious threat letter she found, anxiously asking her lord what it means. Calmly swirls his wine, explaining it's just a weak attempt by his kidnapper framers, muttering a silent apology to Delta for stealing her spotlight. He gives a confident smirk, declaring that this grand prelude is entirely his to perform. Sometime later, Cid strolls down the dark forest path behind the academy and spots Alexia's discarded shoe on the ground. Suddenly, a corrupt, dark-haired knight steps out of the shadows, arrogantly pointing at the evidence. While his light-haired buddy pretends to sense magical residue to frame Cid as the kidnapper, Cid plays the bewildered, innocent student, but the dark-haired knight aggressively declares him under arrest, smugly mocking him for not confessing during his torture, and looking down on him like absolute trash. But in a split second, the atmosphere turns freezing cold, and the arrogant knight is paralyzed in pure terror as an invisible, high-tier strike slices clean through his heavy plate armor.
He screams in agonizing pain as his leg is completely severed, leaving his partner frozen in utter shock. The surviving light-haired knight shrieks and scrambles backward in the dirt, splattered in blood, as he looks up at the terrifying, hooded god of death. The bleeding knight weakly attempts to threaten him, warning him that he'll be a dead man by dawn. Meanwhile, Beta is hiding in the bushes, watching the carnage with absolute fascination as she frantically scribbles into her journal, totally obsessed with how cool he is. Cid raises his glowing slime blade, chillingly stating that there's nothing to fear, his eyes flashing with zero mercy beneath his hood, as he promises that by dawn, his swift strike will finish them, ensuring that all will be over. As a massive explosion echoes in the distance, Cid notes that Delta has officially started her rampage, then turns to his loyal subordinate, telling Beta it's time to move. Beta immediately salutes with a blushing, starry-eyed smile, leaving our ultimate mastermind to smirk into the night, whispering that the grand nocturne has finally begun as he prepares to dance across the battlefield.
The video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Like the video if you're ready for the next part.